Welcome everyone, Costin here with a discussion about sieges in Total War Pharaoh Dynasties. There haven't been necessarily any kind of inherent changes made to the way the sieges work in the game, but there have certainly been battle changes due to the addition of lethality, which does help solve some of the issues, but there are still plenty of problems that do remain in sieges. For what it is worth, I do think that there are certain design decisions that Yolosapien has made with regards to Pharaoh that do help with the situation, but to a certain extent I also feel that it can at times really feel like it's a band-aid. Though certainly that's been an accusation that people have made against the lethality system, which honestly I kind of disagree with. Like, lethality is meant to address a significant shortcoming in particular with regards to infantry combat that has existed for a very, very long time in Total War. But anyway, let's talk about sieges, and we have to start on the campaign map. Because battles do not happen in a vacuum in Total War. They happen within the context of a larger campaign. And one of our primary objectives when we are playing a campaign is to minimize our casualties in as many battles as possible so we can keep going conquering territory. You're always rewarded for playing in a very aggressive fashion in this particular game. If you play it slowly, if you take your time, if you're turtle, you're going to end up losing. In fact, Creative Assembly themselves have stated outright that the game is built around the idea of conquering territory. They said this with respect to Warhammer 3 just before Thrones of the King came out, or roughly at about the same time. So it is important to be able to conquer territory. Now, I was skeptical when Yolosapien announced what they were going to do with sieges, because it did seem like they were listening to some of the wrong feedback. It's like, oh, you're not going to have ladders, pocket ladders, and that's going to fix sieges. That's meaningless. I'll be quite honest on it. Like, that particular perspective that quite a few other people have, content creators or people in the community have, it means nothing. You don't want to go on the walls with ass ladders. It can help the AI in terms of being able to have more openings in a settlement, but it's also a great way for the AI to end up losing a significant number of units. Now, another thing they did is that they removed Siege Attacker. I mean, there are some ways of having it in Pharaoh, but certainly very limited compared to, say, how things are in Warhammer 3. So you're going to have to at least spend a turn when you're besieging a settlement to attack it. Now, what's brilliant, as far as I'm concerned, in terms of how they decided to handle sieges, is the following. When you arrive at the settlement, the auto-resolve is going to be firmly against you, as it pretty much is in Warhammer 3. On the flip side, however, the real benefit of how sieges are handled in Pharaoh is that the more siege equipment you build, the better the auto-resolve is going to be in your favor. It doesn't quite work out from a practical standpoint, but if you're building a lot of rams and siege towers and ladders and all that, you will actually end up in a better situation from an auto-resolve perspective. And this way, you can actually avoid having to fight any siege battles in a campaign. Like, I've played entire campaigns in this game, from launch, dynasties, doesn't matter. And I've been able to play entire campaigns on baseline difficulty levels, to be clear, where I've been able to avoid sieges, one way or another. There are, of course, other things you can use, like attack an army outside of a settlement so you don't have to fight the siege. Those kind of things are obviously available in Pharaoh as well. So that the auto-resolve situation with settlements is significantly better than the way it works in Warhammer 3. Because in Warhammer 3 it doesn't matter, whereas here in Pharaoh it does. Building siege equipment, spending more turns and all that, it does create a tangible benefit in terms of auto-resolve. And while obviously things like armor or certain other things will still matter in a siege, number of units, all that, it is ultimately a much better system because it allows you as a player to avoid having to fight those crappy siege battles that we have in Warhammer 3 where you know you're going to win the fucking battle if you fight it manually, but you're forced to do it continuously. This is one of the great things about Pharaoh. The auto-resolve has its issues, to be certain, but it is a much better experience. If there is any particular downside about the things on the campaign map, it has to do with an outpost system. Specifically one outpost system, not the outpost system inherently. But here's the thing, the AI loves to build freaking forts, and the problem with these forts is that, like, if I actually were to construct one of them instantly, one of the things that does happen here is that you can see that each fort gains a general. The issue that gets created from this is generals themselves in an actual battle, like level 1 garrison generals, are not really going to have that much of an impact in an actual battle. I mean, they're decent units, sure. They're certainly better than most of the other, like, low-tier garrison units. But the problem is this, and this is something that does affect the actual gameplay of sieges in battle. Every single general that you have in your army is such a morale amplifier, or multiplier, whatever, that having the possibility of potentially dealing with 3 freaking generals in a siege battle, if not more, depending on if their army's coming in to reinforce it, creates a pretty bad campaign situation, because you end up with enemy armies that are nigh on freaking unbreakable just because of how many generals they have. It is a problem. Generals are very important in Pharaoh in terms of morale. Mind you, units can still stand a fair amount of time even without generals. But you add generals in a mix, and you might as well be fighting freaking unbreakable units in every single battle. And that is really genuinely freaking annoying. It's worsened about the fact that they're following something that Warhammer 3 has moved away, and they have a general in every settlement as well. This is one of the things that kind of ruined Troy for me, and it's one of the reasons I despise settlement battles in this game as well. It's not because of the gameplay in itself, but when you're dealing with unbreakable freaking enemies in every settlement battle, let me tell you this, unbreakable armies are not fun to freaking deal with. It's one thing in Warhammer 3 where there's certain select units that are unbreakable. Absolutely, like things like Slayers, all that. But when every single settlement, when every single provincial capital features this, then you really don't want to engage in that gameplay. So one of the things I think CA should really improve on, remove the freaking garrison generals, remove the fort generals. Just put, like, I understand that there's reasons why they have fort generals. I get that. I comprehend that aspect. But, like, to be quite blunt about it, when you're looking at, forts, I think it would just be better to not have a garrison general over here, and instead just get, like, one unit that may be on an elite level over here in the fort, or not a unit whatsoever. The point of the forts is, if we look at what they're offering, is that they're supposed to reduce the upkeep of units stationed in them. But the way they actually work out is kind of like an ogre camp, a mechanic where you get a general leading it regardless. And that's not so much of a problem when you're dealing with the ogres, that we can talk about the auto-resolve of that in Warhammer 3, but it is a problem over here. So there's pros and cons on the campaign side of things. I would say from a practical standpoint, it makes it so you don't even want to fucking fight the siege. But you can't avoid doing so. Like, even if one single army is not enough to auto-resolve it, or we don't want to waste the time, like, bring multiple armies, bring multiple generals, get as many troops, quantity, quality, doesn't matter. Bring as many troops as you possibly can in a siege, and you will end up better for it, and you will be able to avoid it, while focusing on fighting the interesting battles that do exist. There are some issues with the field battles in this game, more so with the AI recruitment policies. There is a reason why CA Sofia has asked for feedback on that. I'll probably do a video on that myself later on, but point is, pros, cons. What would I do in terms of this? Well, one of the things I would absolutely say on this is, I think it would just be great if we were able to, when we approach a settlement, we instantly be able to select a bunch of siege equipment, same for AI, that we build, like, a couple of rams, a couple of towers, a couple of sapping points. That would do so much from a gameplay standpoint, especially the sapping points, because it would create openings in the wall. Now, maybe it would cost some resources, fair enough, if you're instantly doing it. I will gladly pay fucking gold for that, like, genuinely, like 10, 20 gold, something like that, for a couple of sapping points, so I have openings, so I can, bring cavalry, bring units that I absolutely do not want to bring in the walls. The most surefire way of losing a siege battle, by the way, and when you're an attacker, is to actually go on the walls. This is why ladders are so meaningless, and so are siege towers. As for the battles themselves, well, what I can say about them is that we are playing them based on the situation in the campaign. So, as stated, it's all contextual. And so, in the vast majority of sieges, in any Total War game, doesn't matter which one we're talking about, modded, unmodded, irrelevant. What you're going to want to do, if you can, is to take these settlements as quickly as possible. Now, in the vast majority of situations in Pharaoh, for what it is worth, you can avoid having to fight them manually, because due to the increased auto-resolve benefit or the ability of attacking an army just outside the settlement, you can avoid the vast majority of sieges. That is good because it avoids a lot of the tedious battles, but avoiding a mechanic is not, it does not mean that said mechanic works quite well. I'm sure that the combat designers in Creative Assembly Sophia, they're designing these sieges under the idea, we're going to build ladders, we're going to build towers, we're going to build rams, we're going to build sap points. Well, except towers and ladders are worthless because it's a death trap to send your units on the wall. Even if they are heavily armored infantry, but especially with lighter infantry, they will just take significantly more casualties, especially if they're facing a determined foe. Like, for instance, in this battle, I would have actually been far better off if I had built 2 rams over here as opposed to a ram and a ladder. I built a ladder for the sake of demonstration purposes. But the unit that I'm going to send up that ladder, yeah, it's going to take more damage than if I had just rushed everyone for the gate. Let me be very clear on this. This gameplay is not fun. It's not interesting. It's not engaging. It doesn't actually provide a great situation. It is better with the addition of lethality because now... because now you no longer have the meta where basically the person who has the heaviest troops more or less wins the battle, especially if they have armor piercing. But yeah, just having heavy armor made such a difference. So it is better, so it means like lighter units, but the gameplay itself is not great. Lethality helps with the situation, the balancing situation, or lack thereof really, where... previously, you just if you could get heavier units, you would win. If you couldn't, you'd get screwed. It made certain lords, like Ramesses with his quote-unquote elite light units, kind of worthless. It still affects them in some way, shape, or form. Some people will complain about, like, oh, range lethality is too powerful. Yeah, but ranged units, at least inherently in terms of their balance, because remember, units are not balanced around the idea of, like, what you can do with campaign customization, but rather they're balanced around the idea of how they are by default. They do run out of ammo pretty quickly. So even if I had the full stack of archers here, I'm not quite sure I'd be able to kill everyone over here, and I'd probably have to go in the wolves. And while archers, some range units can be pretty decent in melee, they're obviously not going to be good as regular units, regular melee units in a fight. Maybe there's some balancing discussion that can happen over there, but still, there are absolutely problems with the way this plays out. Again, you can avoid it, so that is a net benefit if you are looking to play this game, because you avoid a lot of those tedious battles. In general, actually, in Pharaoh, I find myself like, the battles that I am forced to fight are for the most part interesting ones. But what happens when you do need to take a place very quickly because there's an army in there, you want to eliminate it because there's another army on the field that will come and reinforce it. So what do you do then? Well, that is where things become a problem. You're stuck dealing with this horrible type of gameplay. Again, it is not common enough, though that's partly because the AI just doesn't handle itself very well on the campaign. It's actually something that they've asked for feedback. I'll probably do a video on that. From my perspective, I don't think the AI is doing so much of a poor job, as it really just lacks the resources, especially bronze, to be able to compete with the player. Because as a player, we know we need bronze, right? We're going to do everything in our power to get as much bronze as possible, for instance. And wood and food. But food is not something you gain from territories, you trade for it. You get gold, you get bronze, you get stone and all that. And you just want to maintain as much bronze as possible to maintain your army on the field. And since any unit that has any kind of decent capability requires bronze, and the AI is really struggling with that, I can't tell you how many factions I encounter in a campaign that simply just lack it. Yeah, it doesn't end up being particularly great. So that is a problem in terms of that. So I imagine if they do fix the AI, it would be a different situation. But again, vast majority of battles you do fight are actually at least interesting. I do feel it's kind of sad, though, because... like in minor settlement battles, they're actually quite interesting to play right now. Like, lethality is a hell of a drug. And if we were actually fighting sieges, walled settlement battles, inside the actual settlements as opposed to the clusterfuck that ends up happening at the gates here, they would actually be a lot more compelling to play. Especially if you're adding flanking, terrain penalties, weather penalties, all of that would make for a much, much better battle experience than, the clusterfuck at the gates and walls. That is a problem. I mean, the gates and walls, you know what's hilarious? It's not even necessarily the best way to defend, but the AI will do it anyway. So that will actually end up hurting them in terms of their defensive prospects in some ways. Anyway, so those are some of the problems, but it's just that context. How are sieges if you do have that equipment? Again, a lot better if you can open wall breaches, if you can actually get in a settlement and fight. But even then, vast majority of fighting will take place near or at the wall, so it is a problem. I don't know how this could be potentially fixed. I think like just giving us the ability of constructing siege equipment a lot faster. Even if you do have this idea, oh, you need to take a turn, at least allow us to build like multiple ramps, multiple towers, multiple sap points. If we have a full stack, right, we should be able to get a lot more possibilities. So I think that would improve sieges a lot, both defensive and offensive sieges. But as it stands right now, it is a much better siege experience than the misery we have in Warhammer 3. Let me be clear on that. But yeah, I mean, it's still kind of a problem. Maybe they are quote-unquote technically the best sieges in the game. Then again, you do have Shogun 2. And people say, oh, the Shogun 2 sieges are not great. It's like, no, the AI is a bit too passive potentially in that. But like the actual layouts, the way the gameplay is handled, they're significantly better. But these might be, like, despite my complaints, these might be some of the best sieges, or at least from a practical standpoint. You don't fight too many of them. You're not in a situation as you are in many other games where, yeah, I know I'm going to win this easily. It's not going to be fun. It's not going to be interesting. I'll win it anyway, but I have to do it because of the auto resolve. So that is a significant improvement. So great credit to whoever decided to balance things out in that respect. Warhammer 3 could really use that as well, I'm not gonna lie. Or if you show up with siege equipment like a freaking load of cannons, maybe you should have a significantly higher auto resolve in Warhammer 3. Maybe that would be something CA could add. That is all I had to say. Costin signing out. Don't forget to subscribe, like, and enable notifications. Stay tuned for more.